Okay, well, I'm here with Fran, Gavin, the Director of Competitions with the SSE Airtricity League. Fran, I suppose all of the positive news that there has been to put out there today, obviously we had John Delaney talking about the financial health of the FAI and, you know, what's to come in terms of promising news in Drogheda. But there still exists a very dark cloud that's existed over the last month, and I suppose if you're a player of Limerick or Bray the last 2 months or even previous to that, in the issue of player payments, which has obviously been sorted out now at the moment, but it still exists there, and it's still going to take up more column inches, I suppose, in the papers than some of the more positive news that you've had to spin today.
Well, I think the positive news is that we proposed a fund to be set up to ensure that issues that happen in Bray and happen in Limerick, if they occur again and they're unforeseen issues, that there is a comfort for those players who signed those contracts and honoured those contracts, that they will get paid on time and per the contract. It's totally unacceptable if a player is not paid his contract. It's just, and everybody knows that, but the vast majority of our clubs pay their players on time and as per contract, and have done it for several years, and have continued to do it. But unfortunately this has happened, and we have to deal with it, and that's what our priority has been over the last few weeks, is to actually resolve the issues, get straight to the problem, which is in the clubs. It's not the players. The players are the ones on the wrong end of this, and try and resolve it so they get paid, and they get paid as quickly as possible. And then our next step was to look at how can we put some sort of contingency fund in place here, and the PFAI mentioned this last Thursday. The General Secretary was on the radio about the fund, and that's what we're doing. And there is an urgency to do this, to make sure the fund is in place. We want to make sure, we don't want to hang around. Let's get it up, let's get it done, let's give the players comfort. That's why we went out and announced it last night, is to make sure, because if I was a player sitting at home and I heard that, well then I'd have a bit of comfort. And that's what we're trying to do, is give comfort to the players, to say there's a contingency fund will be in place here. The PFAI and the FAI would jointly fund it, and if a club taps into it, there will be sanctions, and they would have to make sure that any monies taken from the fund would be put back into the fund, or there will be further sanctions. So that's what we're trying to do. It's positive. I see the PFAI have cautiously welcomed it, and I think, you know, it's a positive news story, and really that's what we're talking about. And we want to talk, there is a lot of positive initiatives and performances around the league, our underage leagues, our European, but they are positive news on it. It's unfortunate this has happened, but in any industry there is unforeseen circumstances happen. What's unique here is that we're looking to put a fund in place to really address that issue if it does happen again.
At the bottom of the email that was sent out, or the press release sent out yesterday announcing the fund, it said that we await the PFAI's response on this issue. Their response was that they were met with a sense of, I suppose, bewilderment about the whole thing, that, you know, they, summing up their press release, suggested that it was potentially unfair that a fund for stricken clubs of whatever difficulties, that has to be paid by the club's players because they're associated with the PFAI.
This is not asking the players to pay. This is asking the PFAI to contribute to a fund that will be topped up if any money is used by the clubs on it. This is to protect their members. So if I was a member, I'd be saying, I think you should get involved in that. You know, they're aware of it, and very much so that we need to make sure the fund is in place to give their members and players comfort. That's what we're trying to do here. You know, there's no anybody trying to point score or hoodwink anybody in this situation. This is a serious, that if those players and their families can have comfort here. That's why the fund is being set up. The FAI are doing their part. The PFAI should be doing their part on this, I think, really, and I think generally we'll come to an agreement on it, and I think we can all move on here and just start talking about football.
Has there been a meeting arranged between the FAI and the PFAI about this issue? Because from what we can see, I suppose, with all of the press releases and all the commentary in the media, is that there seems to be a breakdown in communication on this issue.
Look, there's been various statements from various parties around all these issues here. The FAI meet all stakeholders various times, and we have discussions, whether it's around this issue, whether it's around the issue in Bray, the issue in Limerick. Those discussions are always ongoing. They continue, and they continue till we get a solution to it, and we get a resolution to it. Who we meet, where we meet them, when we meet them, and what we meet them about is kept internally. That's the way we always do our business. We're not into putting our internal business into the public domain. The situation here is to get a resolution, is to get comfort for players and their families that their contracts will be met by the clubs. Okay? Again, the vast majority of our clubs do their business perfectly correct and have honoured all their contracts, as do the players. So we're looking for a comfort here with everybody. So we're not point scoring with anybody. We're not involved. You can make all the various statements you want. You can make their own personal attacks on people, but we're not there. We're here to work for a solution with all the stakeholders here.
You mentioned, I should say that the club licensing committee has, I suppose, come under a bit of fire recently, and you know how it awards clubs like or any club a license at the beginning of the season. You mentioned as well that it was an unforeseen circumstance what happened with Bray and Limerick, but when a licensing committee is going over these license applications and expressions of interests before the start of the seasons, and surely they have to look at business plans, budgets, etc., can that not be seen going forward as well? You know, they might actually hit a bump here in the middle of the season.
Well, I think if you look back, you also take into account their track record as well. In both cases here, all their contracts were honoured. In one case, one of the clubs, nearly €1 million was paid in wages over the last few years. In another club, it was just below that. So all those commitments were honoured, and they had a track record of honouring the commitments there. But like any business, all their processes are reviewed at the end of each year. I think that's good business practice. Now, whether that's the fixture scheduling, whether that's the registration of players, or whether that's club licensing, I think we get feedback from everybody and see is there areas that we can improve on to make sure that situations don't arise. But unfortunately, in any industry, issues arise that are unexpected. You can have all the checks and balances you want, but in any industry, there's always something can arise that nobody was expecting. And the different models we have of ownership within the league, sometimes that can happen if there's one single owner looking after a club and suddenly there's financial difficulties in their area, then that's unforeseen at that time. It's not expected in it, or something can happen that is caused by an external issue. And that's what this fund is about. It's trying to say, okay, if this does happen now again, okay, well, as a player, what would you want? Well, I want to know my contract will be honoured. And we're saying this fund will go a long way to make sure you have that comfort.
Well, I suppose one of the main points would be that this isn't the first time this has happened, and it's certainly not the first time it's happened with Bray. They got into difficulties last season as well. Other clubs have gone by the wayside, they've gone bust before. So what's like, whatever about a particular circumstance within a season, what seems to be slipping through the gap here in which we're constantly seeing these issues?
Well, I don't agree we're constantly seeing it. I don't agree. That's not true. We're not constantly seeing it. The PFAI have been on record to say that the last few years have been very good in players getting paid, and they haven't had a lot of issues around it. And the two clubs in question have honoured all their commitments, financial commitments, over the last few years. So I don't think it's true to say that we're constantly seeing it. It has improved. I think what you must remember is all the clubs went through the worst recession that has hit the country in many years, and the majority of those clubs survived that. And that's the credit to the people who are running the clubs, whether they're full-time staff, the volunteers, or the people who put their money where their mouth is and actually finance those clubs. And they've done a terrific job in that. And I think people need lose sight of that. That has been a really difficult environment. The clubs have worked really hard to ensure that senior football remains and in those areas that with their clubs. And the league has been very competitive. The positive stuff is that the attendances are going up. It's competitive football. Our underage leagues are doing very well. So there's a lot of positivity around it. A lot of that has been around licensing, sitting there, making sure that the governance is in place, whether it's on whatever side it is on. So licensing does play a huge role in trying to improve the standards of it. Yes, it can be tweaked here and there, and that's as all our practices is. As your businesses changes and the model changes in it, then you have to look at that. That's best practice. We'll continue to do it. But in this case, what we're saying is, how can we ensure that issue, if it happens again, there is a comfort for the players?
I suppose one of the things that the association would be highly praised on would be the underage league structure, and I think that there's been plenty of good news stories out of that in terms of, you know, clubs being able to dip in and give guys an opportunity, and that's great. And I understand that it's going to be extended down further down as time goes on. But when a player is getting from under 15 to under 17 to under 19, and you know, they're ready perhaps maybe to make that leap into senior League of Ireland football, they'd look at the likes of the situation that's been happening and think, is it going to be a gamble for me if I decide to try and make a career out of professional football in Ireland? And more often than not, guys tend to take the option to go for trials and you know, maybe go abroad. You know, a young footballer that we've covered was playing for St. Kevin's Boys, got an opportunity with a couple of League of Ireland sides, but is now over playing in Watford, where he's been offered a pro deal. When you have these sort of dark headlines like this, what message does it send out to the young players coming up through those underage structures?
Well, I think first of all, they now have a platform to showcase their talent, and they play against the best players on good facilities with great coaches. And I think that's important, and that develops the players alone. So we've now created a structure within the clubs and within the country with the national leagues that allows for those players to grow, to prosper, and to get tested all times against the best players. I think you need to go back, and I think to remind you that 99.9% of our clubs do their business very well, and those players can move in. Now, we will never be in a situation where all the best players in the country will stay here. That's just not going to happen. Realistically, we've got the biggest club in the world, nearly on our doorstep. We've got the biggest league in the world financially, only 90 miles away, 100 miles away from us. So the better players will always go over there. But what we're trying to create here, and what we're working towards, is making sure that we can create an environment here that those players can prosper at underage level, and then those players can come into our senior teams and make sure that they have a secure employment. Football in itself generally is insecure, unfortunately, because injuries can stop. But off the pitch, we want to they're all things that can happen on the pitch. Off the pitch, we want to make sure that if an issue happens like Bray, an issue that happens like Limerick again, well, then there's comfort. And I think that's what we're trying to do. That's a responsibility we've taken on. It's also a responsibility of the PFAI to support that, and hopefully they will, and we'll see what comes back from the PFAI. In the last 2 years, the league has undergone a major change in terms of the amount of teams in the Premier and the First Division. That's been, I suppose, covered to death. But when you look back at it, I think this will be this is the first season with the 2 10 division teams. When you look back at it, what are the sort of the positives and the I suppose the negatives that you'll be looking at, and you know, combining the 2 leagues, I suppose? Well, I suppose what we see in both divisions now is 2 very competitive divisions, with Cork and Dundalk vying it out for the I suppose the top spot there, and then the European places, and then the playoff system has brought in I suppose a purpose for everybody to win every match in both divisions, because you don't want to be involved in the Premier in the playoffs, and you do want to be involved in the First Division, and you can see that the buzz around the place, and the crowds are up. There's a lot more at stake in the games. At the First Division games, you go there, you can see that it's much more competitive, because people know that if I get into 4th place, well, I'm going to be in a playoff here, and you can look forward to that. So there's been a lot of positives around it, and I think generally the play has been very good, the performances have been good, and there's a lot of positives to say with the 10-team league, and I think you can only judge these over the next few years, that you can actually see the trends when you have it for a period of time. And very finally for me, there's all sorts of speculation over when you'll sit down and review the season, and what needs to change, etc., for next season. Is there a plan, I suppose, to hand back a little bit of the control of the league to the particular clubs? Well, it's well documented that the discussions between the clubs have been ongoing, and ourselves have been ongoing over the last year and a half. We want a resolution to those discussions by December, so we can plan for next year and the years going ahead. And our preferred option, and it's been well documented, is that it will be a hybrid situation where the clubs and ourselves have a partnership around it. And I think that those discussions are ongoing, and we need those discussions to come to fruition by December, so everybody can plan for the next few years, and that we continue to improve the league. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that it's an improvement, and ensure that we can be sitting here talking about football. Really, that's what we want.
Okay, Fran, thank you very much indeed.